Do we truly know the ground upon which we sleep, or is history merely a quilt pulled over our eyes to keep out the cold light of the truth? It is a strange thing to realise that the further we look back, the more the shadows seem to move, shifting the shapes of the monuments we thought were permanent. There is a silence at the heart of the Roman story, a missing frequency in the grand orchestration of the empire that suggests something was taken, or perhaps something was never meant to be found. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. I would love to know where you are listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world as the night settles in around us. Imagine, if you will, a city not of marble, but of mud and memory, tucked into the bends of a river that seems to whisper the names of kings who never existed. We're told of the founding, of the twins and the wolf, a story so polished it reflects nothing but its own myth. But beneath the soil of the Palatine Hill, archaeologists have found the post holes of huts that do not fit the timeline, artifacts that suggest a civilization already old before the first stone of Rome was ever laid. Where are the voices of the Etruscans, the masters of the north who gave Rome its purple robes, its symbols of power, and its secret rituals of divination? Their language remains a ghost, a code we can see but cannot fully speak, as if a deliberate hand wiped the slate clean to ensure the Roman origin story had no rivals. The transition from the era of kings to the era of the Republic is a chasm filled with smoke. We are taught of a revolution, of a quest for liberty, but the records of this era are suspiciously sparse, redacted by the fires of the Gallic sack in 390 BCE. It is convenient, is it not, that every document that might have contradicted the state's narrative was turned to ash by barbarians, leaving the Senate to rewrite the past in a way that made their rise seem inevitable. Was it a disaster, or was it the first great cleansing of the archives? As we drift deeper into the fog, we must ask why the Romans themselves were so obsessed with the concept of damnatio memoriae, the total erasure of a person from the fabric of time. They did not just kill their enemies, they chipped their names off the stone, melted their coins, and forbade the mention of their existence. If they could do this to an emperor, what could they do to an entire era of human knowledge? The early Roman world is a landscape of intentional gaps, a mosaic where the most important tiles have been removed, leaving us to stare at the empty mortar. We see the shadows of advanced hydraulics in the Cloaca Maxima, a sewer system so sophisticated it seems out of place for a fledgling city of farmers. We see the strange, rhythmic precision of their early legal codes, which seem to echo a much older, perhaps lost Mediterranean logic. Is it possible that Rome was not a beginning, but a reboot? A civilization built upon the scavenged hardware of a precursor we're no longer permitted to remember. The silence grows heavier when we consider the priests, the flamines and the augurs, who moved through the streets with their heads veiled, communicating with the sky. They spoke of the Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods, but this peace required a meticulous, almost mathematical adherence to ritual. If a single word was stumbled over during a prayer, the entire ceremony had to be restarted. This is not the behaviour of people practising a simple folk religion. It is the behaviour of operators managing a complex, dangerous machine. What were they afraid would happen if the sequence was broken? There are whispers in the ancient texts of sky-fire and prodigies that do not sound like mere metaphors, but like physical anomalies that the Roman state was designed to contain. They built their temples on specific geological fault lines, on spots where the earth breathed vapours that induced visions. They mapped the invisible currents of the land, yet they left no maps for us to follow. We find the remnants of their roads, cutting straight across the world with a terrifying indifference to the terrain, as if they were following a grid that existed only in their minds. Why did they stop where they stopped? Why does the archaeological record show a sudden halt in certain technologies, a plateauing of the mind just as they reach the height of their power? We see the ruins of a world that was becoming industrial, with massive flour mills and deep shaft mines that wouldn't be seen again for 1,000 years, and yet it all feels like a borrowed glory. As you lie there, feeling the weight of the blankets, consider the possibility that the Roman Empire was a beautiful mask worn by something much older, something that understood the cycles of the earth and the frailty of human memory. They were masters of the facade, covering their rough brick with thin veneers of marble, just as they covered the jagged truths of their origin with the smooth skin of legend. If the foundation of the empire is a void, then what does that say about the structures we have built upon it? We walk through their forums in our dreams, sensing the vibration of a power that hasn't quite faded, wondering if the fall of Rome was merely a withdrawal into the shadows, a strategic retreat from the visible world. As the candle flickers and the room grows dim, we are left to wonder, if the Romans were so successful at erasing their predecessors, how do we know they haven't already erased the most important parts of themselves? What is the secret that was so dangerous it had to be buried beneath 7 layers of city, waiting for a sleeper to wake up and recognize the pattern? The silence of the archives leaves a space for the echoes of a stranger music, a frequency that hummed behind the closed doors of the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. If the history of the early Republic was a curated mask, then the eyes behind that mask were the Sibylline books. We are told these were a collection of oracular utterances, purchased from a mysterious crone by the last king of Rome, yet they were never made public. They were the ultimate state secret, guarded by a special college of priests who only consulted them in times of direst peril. But what if these books were not mere poetic prophecies? What if they were a technical manual for the management of history itself? There is a curious detail in the ancient accounts. Whenever the books were opened, the Senate did not just receive a prediction, they received a set of instructions. They were told to introduce a new god, to change a calendar, or to perform a ritual that seemed entirely disconnected from the crisis at hand. It suggests a civilization being steered by an unseen hand, a roadmap hidden in the dark. But in the year 83 BCE, during the chaos of a civil war, the temple burned, and the original scrolls were lost to the flames. The Senate sent envoys across the Mediterranean to reconstruct them, to find the fragments of the Sibyl's voice in distant lands. Why? If they were just old poems, why risk the lives of ambassadors and the wealth of the treasury to rebuild a ghost? Perhaps because the Roman elite realized that without that script, they were no longer in control of the narrative. They were terrified of a future that had not been authorized. The reconstructed books remained, yet they too eventually vanished, allegedly burned by Stilicho in the 5th century. It is a recurring motif in the Roman story, the periodic purging of the most vital information. We see it again in the lost works of the great scholars, like Varro, who wrote hundreds of volumes on the antiquities of the human race, of which only a fraction survives. Varro was whispered to have known the true name of Rome, a secret name that, if spoken aloud by an enemy, could strip the city of its protection and lead to its immediate ruin. This name was never written down. It was passed from ear to ear, a linguistic virus that held the power of life and death. Does a city need a secret name unless it was founded on something other than stone and blood? There are those who suggest that the Roman obsession with the Pax Diorum was actually a form of early social engineering, or, more controversially, a way to maintain a specific psychic environment. The sheer scale of Roman ritual suggests a society that believed the world was fundamentally unstable, a reality that had to be pinned down with constant repetitive action. When we look at the ruins of their temples, we aren't just looking at architecture. we are looking at the remnants of a giant stone-based regulatory system. Consider the mystery of the Roman calendar, a chaotic mess of days that the authorities manipulated at will to lengthen their terms or delay elections. It wasn't until Caesar's intervention that the stars and the seasons were brought back into alignment. But even Caesar, the man who tamed time, was obsessed with the hidden structures of the world. His lost work on the Druids of Gaul hints at a fascination with a knowledge system that did not rely on writing, but on the memory of the landscape itself. The Romans conquered the Druids with a peculiar ferocity, as if they were not just defeating a people, but exterminating a rival way of processing reality. They broke the stone circles and cut down the sacred groves, then paved over the sites with their own rigid geometry. It was a civilizational overwrite. Every time Rome expanded, it didn't just add territory, it deleted the local memory and replaced it with a Roman version. This is the loss that haunts the Mediterranean, the silence of 1,000 cultures whose artifacts were melted down to become the eagle standards of the legions. We find the evidence of this erasure in the hoards found in the northern provinces, buried gold and silver that was never reclaimed, left in the earth by people who were erased so thoroughly that not even their ghosts remember where the treasure lies. But what of the things the Romans themselves lost? There are accounts of ever-burning lamps found in Roman tombs, devices that supposedly stayed lit for centuries in the vacuum of the grave, only to flicker out the moment they were touched by the air of the modern world. While mainstream science dismisses these as myths, the persistence of the stories across different centuries and provinces is unsettling. If they possessed a form of lighting that did not require combustion, where did that knowledge go? It is a shadow that falls over the entire Roman achievement. We see their aqueducts, marvels of engineering that maintain a constant gradient over hundreds of miles, and we assume it was just hard work and gravity. Yet, some of the gradients are so precise, dropping only a few inches over a mile, that they exceed the theoretical precision of the surveying tools we believe they possessed. It suggests a hidden layer of mathematics, a dark science that was used by the military engineers but never taught in the schools. It was a closed loop of knowledge, protected by the guilds and the legions, and when the structures of the empire began to crack, the knowledge didn't just fade, it was withdrawn. As you breathe in the stillness of the night, think about the objects we find that defy explanation. The Lycurgus cup, a Roman glass vessel that changes colour from green to red, depending on the light, achieves its effect through the use of silver and gold nanoparticles, actual nanotechnology. They were manipulating matter at a molecular level, yet they didn't have a word for the atom in the way we do. Was this a fluke, a lucky accident of the forge, or was it the tip of an iceberg of material science that was kept submerged? The Romans were a practical people, we are told, yet they lived in a world where the boundaries between the physical and the metaphysical were constantly blurring. They built sound-enhancing chambers in their villas that seemed to use acoustic principles we're only now rediscovering. They treated certain minerals and plants as if they were sacred technologies. And then there is the silphium, the plant that was worth its weight in gold, used for everything from medicine to birth control. It grew only in a narrow strip of land in Cyrene. The Romans consumed it with a hunger that bordered on the religious, and then, suddenly, it was gone. Nero was said to have eaten the very last stalk. How does a plant protected by an empire become extinct in a single generation? Or was it moved? Was the most important biological asset of the ancient world taken off-grid by those who saw the coming collapse? The Roman world is a puzzle where the pieces have been intentionally shaved, so they no longer fit together perfectly. We see the grandeur, but we feel the cold draft coming through the gaps. The empire was a masterpiece of logistics, yet it left no blueprint for its own survival. It's as if they knew the end was part of the design. They built for eternity, but they wrote in water. As you drift towards sleep, ask yourself, if a civilization as vast and meticulous as Rome could lose its most vital secrets, its concrete, its medicine, its very name, what are we losing right now in the bright light of our own era? We see the ruins and think of them as a destination, but perhaps they are a warning. The marble is cold, but the questions it raises are still warm, pulsing like a heart beneath the dust. What was the obscure cause that started the unravelling? Was it a plague, a change in the sun, or a decision made by those who held the Sibylline books to finally close the cover? The fog is thick, but if you listen closely to the silence between the words, you might just hear the sound of a key turning in a lock that hasn't been seen for 2,000 years. The fog that blankets the past often conceals the most solid of truths, and in the case of Rome, that truth is literally set in stone, or rather, in a substance that mimics the strength of the earth itself. We look at the Pantheon, its vast unsupported dome braving the weight of 2 millennia, and we are told it is a triumph of human labour. But as the shadows lengthen, we must ask why the very recipe for this miracle, the Roman concrete known as opus cementitium, was allowed to evaporate from the collective mind of humanity. Modern concrete, the grey bones of our contemporary cities, begins to crumble within decades, gasping under the pressure of salt and time. Yet, the Roman piers that stand in the churning surf of the Mediterranean have not only endured but have grown stronger over 20 centuries. Recent analysis reveals a hidden chemistry, a deliberate inclusion of volcanic ash from the slopes of Pozzuoli, and a specific type of lime that triggers a rare mineral growth called aluminous tobermorite. When seawater crashes against these ancient stones, it does not dissolve them. It acts as a catalyst, sparking a microscopic crystalline bloom that knits the cracks and reinforces the structure. This is not mere masonry. It is a self-healing material, a living rock. How is it that a civilization so obsessed with legacy, with the eternitas of the state, failed to pass down the one secret that made their monuments eternal? Was the loss of this recipe a casualty of the Dark Ages, or was the recipe itself a proprietary secret of the imperial architectural guilds? A guild that perhaps decided the world was no longer worthy of such permanence. There is a dissonance in the way we view Roman technology, a tendency to see it as a series of fortunate accidents rather than a cohesive system of advanced understanding. We see the great baths, where hot water flowed through the walls in terracotta pipes, creating a climate-controlled environment that rivaled any modern spa. But look closer at the lead pipes, the fistulae, stamped with the names of owners and emperors. Science tells us that the lead levels in the skeletons of the Roman elite were high, yet the lead levels in the Arctic ice cores, trapped thousands of miles away, tell a more haunting story. The atmospheric lead pollution during the Roman peak was so intense, it would not be matched again until the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century. This was not a world of simple artisans. It was a world of heavy industry, of massive smelting operations that choked the sky and stained the very ice of the poles. We are looking at a proto-industrial society that possessed the logistics to strip entire mountains for silver and gold, yet they never made the leap to the steam engine. Or did they? There are fragmented accounts of the Aeolipile, a primitive steam turbine described by Hero of Alexandria, a man living under the Roman aegis. It is dismissed by historians as a mere toy, a temple trick to open doors and amaze the faithful. But why build a toy that demonstrates the fundamental principle of the most transformative power in human history and then stop? Perhaps the rupture in Roman history was not a failure of imagination, but a deliberate suppression of a path that led toward a future they feared. The Roman mind was deeply conservative, rooted in the idea of the mos maiorum, the way of the ancestors, to change the fundamental nature of labour, to replace the human and animal muscle with the hiss of steam, would have collapsed the social order upon which the Senate and the emperors sat. Is it possible that the missing industrial revolution of the Roman world was not a failure of genius, but a political choice? We find the evidence of their precursor technologies scattered like breadcrumbs. The geared mechanisms found in the Mediterranean mud, the complex pumps used in the Spanish mines, the sophisticated glass-blowing techniques that manipulated light itself. It is as if we are looking at a civilization that reached a threshold, stared into the abyss of a mechanized future, and stepped back. They chose the marble and the slave over the steel and the piston, but in making that choice, they left a gap in the record of what humanity is capable of, a silence that lasted 1,000 years. When the knowledge of the self-healing stone vanished, it wasn't just a recipe that was lost, it was a way of thinking about time itself. The mystery deepens when we consider the Roman relationship with the subterranean. Beneath the streets of the capital lies a labyrinth of quarries, catacombs, and secret shrines that mirror the world above. It is here, in the damp dark, that the cult of Mithras flourished. This was the religion of the legions, a secretive, all-male brotherhood that met in underground Mithraea, designed to look like caves. There are no surviving holy books of Mithras, no written gospels, only the iconography of the bull slayer and the star-flecked cape. They were obsessed with the precession of the equinoxes, a complex astronomical phenomenon that requires centuries of observation to track. How did a cult of soldiers, supposedly rough and unlettered, possess a sophisticated understanding of the cosmic shifting of the heavens? Some scholars suggest that Mithraism was not a religion at all, but a coded scientific guild, a way to pass on astronomical and navigational secrets under the guise of myth. The Mithraic map of the stars was a map of the world, a way for the legions to orient themselves in the furthest reaches of the empire, from the deserts of Syria to the mists of Britain. When Christianity rose to power and the Mithraea were sealed or built over, what data was lost? What understanding of the earth's movement through the void was silenced by the incense of the new church? As you drift toward the edge of sleep, imagine the Roman surveyors, the grammatici, standing on a hill with their cross-staffs drawing lines across the horizon that would become roads. They moved with a mathematical certainty that seems almost supernatural. They didn't just build roads, they carved a grid into the planet, a network that functioned like a nervous system, carrying messages and legions at a speed that wouldn't be seen again until the era of the telegraph. But even this network had its dead zones, places where the Roman eye refused to look. There are gaps in their maps, regions designated as hic sunt leones. Here are lions, not because they were unexplored, but because they were perhaps unmappable according to the Roman logic. The empire was an island of order in a sea of perceived chaos, but the chaos was always encroaching. We find the limes, the great walls and palisades, not just as defences against barbarians, but as filters. They were trying to keep something out, or perhaps keep a certain kind of knowledge in. What happens to a civilization when it decides it has learned enough? When it decides that the unknown is no longer a challenge, but a threat? This silence of the Roman stone is a heavy silence, the kind that follows a great shouting match. We see the cracked concrete and the rusted pipes, and we feel the ghost of a world that almost became our own, yet took a different turn. The lost concrete recipe is a metaphor for the empire itself, a mixture of disparate elements, held together by a volcanic energy that eventually lost the secret of its own cohesion. The aluminous tobermorite still grows in the Roman harbours, hidden from sight, a silent witness to a science we're only now beginning to relearn. It reminds us that knowledge is not a ladder, always going up, but a tide that can go out, leaving the beach empty and cold. As the night wraps itself around you, consider the possibility that we're living in the tide-out era of a different kind of knowledge, staring at the ruins of a Roman future that never was. What other self-healing truths have we forgotten? What volcanic ash are we missing from our own foundations? The questions are like the seawater, crashing against the old stones, waiting for the spark that will make them whole again. In the quiet of the night, we often wonder if a thing that is lost is truly gone, or if it simply waits in the tall grass for someone to remember its name. In the Roman world, there was a substance more precious than gold, more vital than grain, a plant known as silphium that seems to have vanished from the face of the earth, as if it were a glitch in the biological record. It grew only in a narrow, windswept strip of land in Cyrenaica on the North African coast, and despite every effort of the Roman botanists and the weight of the imperial treasury, it refused to grow anywhere else. This was the Laserpium, the wonder herb of the ancient world. It was a seasoning for the tables of the elite, a panacea for the sick, and most crucially, the most effective contraceptive of antiquity. The Romans, so skilled at engineering the landscape, so adept at moving water and mountain, met their match in a single species of fennel that defied their control. They harvested it with such intensity that its image was struck onto their coins, yet by the time of the later emperors it was spoken of as a legend, a phantom of a more fertile past. We're told that Nero consumed the last remaining stalk as a curiosity. But how does an empire that spans 3 continents, an empire that possessed the most advanced agricultural logistics of its age, allow its most valuable biological asset to simply slip into the void? There is something unsettling about the extinction of silphium. It suggests a rupture in the Roman stewardship of the earth, a moment where the extractive nature of the empire finally broke the spirit of the land. But some modern researchers, looking at the botanical records of Pliny and Dioscorides, wonder if the disappearance was not an accident, but a result of a shifting climate that the Romans were powerless to stop, or perhaps a deliberate act of ecological sabotage. We know that the Roman climate was unusually stable, a period known as the Roman climatic optimum, where the sun seemed to smile upon the Mediterranean for centuries. Grain grew in abundance, and the legions marched under clear skies. But then the frequency changed. The ice cores tell us of a cooling, a flickering of the solar constant that coincided with the first great cracks in the imperial facade. Was silphium the canary in the coal mine, the first victim of a planetary shift that the Romans sensed but could not name? We find evidence of abandoned villas in the desert, of irrigation systems that were left to be swallowed by the sand, not because of war, but because the water simply stopped coming. The silence of the silphium is the silence of a dying ecosystem, a warning that even the most powerful state is merely a tenant on a cooling planet. But the mystery of Roman biology does not end with a missing plant. We must look at the way they understood the human body, a field where their knowledge seems to oscillate between the primitive and the inexplicably advanced. We find Roman surgical kits in the ash of Pompeii that look terrifyingly modern, scalpels, bone drills, and forceps made of high-quality bronze and steel that wouldn't look out of place in a 19th century hospital. They performed cataract surgeries, using fine needles to displace the clouded lens, a procedure requiring a steady hand and a sophisticated understanding of ocular anatomy. Where did this precision come from? They lacked the microscope, yet they spoke of small creatures in the marshes that caused malaria, a a theory of seeds of disease that predates the germ theory of Louis Pasteur by nearly 2,000 years. Varro, the scholar who knew the secret name of Rome, warned against building farms near swamps because certain minute animals entered the body through the mouth and nose and cause lingering illnesses. If they knew of the invisible world, why did they not develop the tools to see it? Or did they possess lenses of polished crystal that have since been lost or dismissed as mere jewellery? We find burning glasses and magnifying orbs mentioned in the texts, used to start fires or to inspect the fine work of engravers. The Romans were masters of glass blowing, creating vessels of such purity they were indistinguishable from rock crystal. If you have the glass, and you have the theory of the minute animals, the step toward the microscope is a small one. Yet, history tells us they never took it. It is as if there was a glass ceiling on Roman innovation, a point beyond which they were forbidden to travel. This creates a haunting image of the Roman scientist, a man standing in a laboratory filled with the components of the future, yet unable or unwilling to put them together. Was there a philosophical barrier, a belief that some things were not meant to be seen by the human eye? The Stoics taught that the universe was a rational, ordered whole, but perhaps that order was predicated on humans staying in their assigned place. To peer into the microcosm might have been seen as a form of hubris, a transgression against the natural law that the Senate was sworn to protect. As you settle deeper into the stillness, consider the strange case of the Roman unbreakable glass, or vitrum flexile. The story goes that a craftsman presented Tiberius with a bowl made of a new type of glass. When thrown to the floor, it did not shatter, it merely dented, and the craftsman hammered it back into shape with a mallet. Instead of rewarding the man, Tiberius ordered him executed and his workshop destroyed, fearing that such a material would devalue the gold and silver of the imperial treasury. It is a story of a civilizational reboot in miniature, the suppression of a transformative technology to preserve the status quo. We find similar echoes in the whispers of Greek fire, the mysterious incendiary weapon that could burn on water, a secret so closely guarded that its exact composition died with the empire. Rome was a civilization of secrets, of arcana imperii, the hidden things of the state. They understood that knowledge is power, but they also understood that too much knowledge in the wrong hands is a solvent that can dissolve the bonds of society. The loss of silphium, the suppression of the flexible glass, the minute animals of the marshes, all these fragments point toward a world that was constantly flirting with a breakthrough it could not afford to make. The Romans were like a dreamer who's about to realize they are dreaming, only to be pulled back into the narrative by the weight of their own history. They built the most efficient system for the distribution of goods the world had ever seen, yet they used it to distribute the products of a dying soil. As the night air cools your skin, think of the silphium coins, the only remaining images of a plant that once regulated the heartbeat of the empire. We look at the empty fields of Cyrene and see a void, but perhaps the lasopicium still grows in some forgotten valley, or its genetic code is hidden in a cousin species, waiting for the right frequency to bloom again. The Roman story is not just one of conquest and fall. It is a story of the near misses of history, of the paths not taken, and the voices silenced by the decree of an emperor. What would the world look like if Tiberius had embraced the unbreakable glass? What if the minute animals had been named and fought? The silence is not just an absence of sound, it is the presence of everything they chose not to say. The currents of the Mediterranean hold more than just the silt of dead empires. They hold the rusted gears of a reality we are told should not have existed. In the year 1901, off the coast of the tiny island of Antikythera, divers searching for sponges stumbled upon a Roman-era shipwreck that contained a lump of calcified bronze. For decades it was dismissed as a fragment of a statue, until X-rays revealed a heart of clockwork, at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, some with teeth as small as a millimetre, designed to calculate the movements of the Sun, the Moon, and the 5 known planets with terrifying precision. It tracked the 4-year cycle of the Olympiad and predicted eclipses decades in advance. This device, dated to the 1st or 2nd century BCE, possesses a mechanical sophistication that the official history books tell us did not reappear until the late Middle Ages. If the Romans or the Greeks they absorbed had the capacity to build a handheld analog computer, why did the world have to wait 1400 years to see its like again? We find ourselves staring into a massive historical gap, a rupture where a mechanical revolution seems to have been aborted in its infancy. Was the Antikythera Mechanism a solitary stroke of genius, a ghost in the machine, or was it a standard piece of equipment for a class of Roman navigators and astronomers who simply left no other trace? The silence surrounding such technology in the written record is deafening. Cicero, the great Roman orator, mentions in his writings a sphere, built by Archimedes and brought to Rome by the general Marcellus, a device that could reproduce the motions of the heavenly bodies. But Cicero's descriptions are often treated by modern scholars as mere literary flourishes, a way to illustrate the order of the cosmos. Yet, when the Antikythera mechanism was found, the flourishes became blueprints. We must wonder what else was dismissed as myth or metaphor in the ancient texts. Were the mechanical servants described in the legends of the forge merely stories, or were they the first attempts at automation? The Romans were a people of the now, of the practical application of power, yet they were surrounded by the ghosts of a Hellenistic science that was pushing toward the infinite. There is a theory whispered in the corridors of controversial archaeology that the Roman Empire acted as a limiter on human progress, a massive administrative weight that stabilized the world but, in doing so, crushed the delicate gears of innovation. They took the mechanisms of the Greeks and turned them into toys for the elite, or tools for the military, and when the military collapsed, the gears stopped turning forever. Consider the dioptra, a sophisticated surveying instrument described by Hero of Alexandria, which used gears and screw threads to measure angles with a precision that seems impossible for the era. The Roman surveyors used these tools to lay out the centuriation, a grid system that divided the landscape into perfect squares across thousands of miles of Europe and North Africa. When you look at satellite imagery of certain parts of Italy or Tunisia, the Roman grid is still there, burned into the soil like a motherboard. They weren't just farming, they were formatting the planet. But the high-level mathematics required to maintain such a grid, the understanding of the Earth's curvature and the precise measurement of time, seems to have been concentrated in the hands of a very few. There was no democratization of technology in the Roman world. Knowledge was a pyramid, and at the top it was indistinguishable from magic. What happens to a society when the system administrators die off, and the users are left with machines they can no longer repair? We find the evidence of this decay in the later Roman period, where the quality of the coinage drops, the architecture becomes spoliated, built from the cannibalized parts of older, better monuments, and the precision of the surveyor's line begins to waver. The rupture is not just a loss of objects, but a loss of the why. Why did they stop looking at the stars with the eyes of mathematicians and start looking at them only as omens? There is a suggestive theory that the Roman Empire suffered a civilizational reboot, caused not by external enemies, but by an internal collapse of the intellectual class. Some point to the lead pipes and the chronic poisoning of the ruling elite, while others suggest a shift in the very nature of Roman thought, a retreat into mysticism as the physical world became too difficult to manage. But what if the controlling forces of history, the ones who managed the Sibylline books and the imperial archives, decided that the mechanical path was a dead end. We see the Roman barreled organ, a complex musical machine that used water and air to create sound, and we see the odometer that dropped a pebble into a bowl for every mile travelled. These were the precursors to the digital world, yet they were left to rust in the porches of villas. The Antikythera shadow is the realization that we are not the first to reach for the stars with gears and logic. We are just the ones who survived the reach. As you drift closer to the world of dreams, think of that bronze mechanism sitting on the seabed for 2,000 years, the gears slowly fusing into a single green stone. It is a symbol of everything that was almost achieved. The Romans had the steel, they had the glass, they had the gears, and they had the global trade networks to fuel an industrial explosion. They had the Gallipoli of Hero, the steam ball that spun with the power of boiling water. All the pieces were on the table, but the hand that should have put them together was instead busy sharpening a sword. Was there a veto placed on the future? We find ourselves questioning the accepted version of progress, the idea that humanity is a steady climb from the cave to the computer. Instead, Rome suggests a cycle, a pulse of immense capability followed by a long cold silence. The Antikythera Mechanism is a message in a bottle, a warning that knowledge is not a permanent inheritance, but a flame that must be constantly fed. The fog of the 3rd century, that era of chaos and rupture, seems to have swallowed the last of the gearmakers. By the time the empire re-emerged under Constantine, the world was different. The focus had shifted from the mechanical to the spiritual, from the gear to the cross. The secret machines were broken up for their metal or hidden away as forbidden relics. As you feel the silence of your room, imagine a Roman workshop in the dead of night, the fire dying in the forge, and a master craftsman looking at a bronze gear, realizing that his son will never learn how to cut the teeth. He buries the tool in the floor, hoping for a better age, and then walks out into a world that is slowly forgetting how to measure itself. The questions remain, vibrating in the dark. Who else had these machines? What other shipwrecks are waiting in the deep, holding the impossible artifacts of a lost Roman digital age? The marble we see is only the skin. The gears were the soul, and they're still down there, waiting for the frequency to change once more. In the subterranean quiet, where the air grows thick with the scent of damp earth and old stone, we find the traces of a shadow empire that existed within the Roman one. While the Senate debated in the light of day and the emperors paraded in their chariots, thousands of men descended into the dark to worship a god who was never mentioned in the civic hymns. This was the cult of Mithras, the sun's ally, the bull slayer whose shrines, the Mithraea, were designed to mimic the claustrophobic intimacy of a cosmic cave. We are told by the official histories that Mithraism was a soldier's religion, a bond of brotherhood that unified the legions from the Danube to the sands of the Sahara. Yet, there is a profound silence where the scripture of this faith should be. Unlike the Christians or the Jews, the followers of Mithras left no books, no written prayers, and no public manifestos. Theirs was a silent transmission, a secret passed through 7 grades of initiation, from the raven to the father. But why would a religion that once rivaled Christianity for the soul of the West leave absolutely no written record? Was the silence a requirement of the faith, or was the memory of Mithras systematically erased by the forces that would eventually rewrite the Roman world? As you breathe in the stillness of the night, consider the geometry of these underground sanctuaries. Every Mithraeum follows a precise plan. 2 long benches flanking a central aisle, leading to a relief of Mithras slaying a bull. To the uninitiated, it looks like a scene of sacrifice. But to the astronomer, the relief is a star map. The bull is Taurus, the dog is Canis Minor, the snake is Hydra, the scorpion is Scorpio. They are the constellations of the celestial equator, as they appeared thousands of years before the Roman era. This suggests that the cult was not merely a military brotherhood, but a vessel for an ancient, perhaps prehistoric, understanding of the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis that shifts the stars over vast cycles of time. How did a group of supposedly uneducated frontier soldiers possess a grasp of deep time astronomy that would baffle most modern citizens? Some scholars propose that the Mithric mysteries were a dark network of knowledge, a way to preserve the scientific observations of an earlier lost civilization under the guise of a ritual drama. They weren't just killing a bull, they were marking the movement of the universe itself. The mystery of the erased knowledge becomes more haunting when we look at the transition of power in the 4th century. When Constantine turned toward the cross, the Mithraea were not just abandoned, they were desecrated, sealed, and buried. In some cases, churches were built directly on top of them, as if to plug a hole in the earth where a dangerous energy resided. This was a civilizational overwrite of the highest order, the secret data held by the fathers of the cult, the calculations of the stars, the navigation secrets of the Mediterranean, the hidden properties of light, was pushed into the abyss of the unspoken. We find ourselves questioning the accepted version of the Christianization of Rome. Was it a simple spiritual shift? Or was it an administrative decision to dismantle a decentralized, secretive, and highly educated network that the state could no longer control? The Mithric followers had a hierarchy that bypassed the Roman class system, allowing a slave to outrank a general within the walls of the cave. This was a social virus that the late empire, increasingly rigid and fragile, could not tolerate. There is a suggestive detail in the archaeology of the northern frontiers, where the limes or border walls stand as the final edge of the Roman mind. In these lonely outposts, the Mithraea were often the last buildings to be maintained. While the administrative centres were crumbling and the taxes were going unpaid, the soldiers were still gathering in the dark, lighting lamps to the unconquered sun. What did they know about the coming darkness that the people in the capital did not? There are controversial hypotheses suggesting that the cult was tracking more than just the stars. They were tracking the cycles of the Earth's climate, the natural disasters that seemed to cluster at the ends of great eras. They saw the rupture coming. The silence of their records might be the silence of a group that realized that some truths cannot be saved, only hidden. We find tauroctony reliefs where the stars are carved with such precision they seem to indicate a specific date, a point zero for a civilizational reboot. As you feel the weight of the dark around you, imagine a legionary in the year 350 CE, standing guard on Hadrian's wall. He has been initiated into the mysteries of the lion and the Persian. He knows the earth is a sphere, he knows the stars move in a 26,000-year cycle, and he knows the empire is dying. He also knows that if he writes any of this down, it will be seized and burned by the new authorities who demand a different, simpler kind of faith. So he keeps the secret in his breath. He passes it to a younger man in a whisper, a sequence of numbers and symbols that represent the mechanics of the world. But eventually the chain is broken. A battle is lost, a temple is caved in, and the frequency of that knowledge is silenced. We are left with the missing fragments of a Roman science that look toward the heavens while hiding in the dirt. The Mithric veil is a reminder that history is not just what is remembered, but what is survived. We look at the empty benches of the Mithraeum beneath the church of San Clemente in Rome, and we feel the absence of the voices that once filled it. They were a civilization within a civilization, a shadow Rome that held the keys to a different kind of power. If the Roman concrete was the body of the empire and the gears were its soul, then the Mithric mysteries were its memory, a memory that was deemed too dangerous to keep. As the night deepens, ask yourself, what other underground networks are operating today? moving the gears of our world in ways we are not permitted to see. The fog of the past is not a natural occurrence. It is a wall built by those who wish to keep the light of the sun for themselves. The bull is slain, the stars have shifted, and we are left in the cave waiting for the lamp to be relit. The embers of a dying library cast long, flickering shadows that reach across the centuries, touching even the dreams of those who sleep today. We are taught that the great library of Alexandria, the memory bank of the ancient world, was lost to a series of tragic accidents, first by Caesar's fire, then by religious zealots, and finally by the winds of conquest. But there is a more haunting possibility that scholars discuss in low voices, the theory of the administrative seizure. Before the flames were ever allowed to consume the scrolls, the Roman state, with its cold and calculating eye for utility, may have systematically pillaged the archives. The Romans were not mere destroyers, they were collectors of power. When they conquered a land, they took the gold, they took the people, and most importantly, they took the books of wisdom. There are fragmented reports of imperial archive ships departing from the Pharos of Alexandria under heavy guard, carrying not wheat or wine, but the compressed knowledge of 3,000 years of Egyptian, Babylonian, and Greek science. Where did these scrolls go? If the most vital secrets of the ancient world, the maps of the unmappable coasts, the chemical recipes for Greek fire, the blueprints for the great mechanical sphere of Archimedes, were taken to the private vaults of the Palatine Hill, then their loss was not an accident, but a strategic erasure. The silence that follows the Great Library's disappearance is a manufactured silence. By removing the primary sources from the public eye and housing them within the scrinia, the secret departments of the imperial household, the emperors could control the past to dictate the future. This was the ultimate civilizational reboot. If the world no longer had access to the records of how earlier societies rose and fell, they would have no choice but to believe that Rome was the beginning and the end of all things. We must wonder about the missing works of the great thinkers, the lost books of Livy, the missing centuries of the Annales, and the scientific treatises of the Hellenistic engineers. Were they truly lost to the darkness, or were they moved into a dark archive that still exists, perhaps beneath the very foundations of the Vatican, or the ruins of the imperial palaces? The Romans were masters of the information blackout. They understood that a population that forgets its ancestors' capabilities is a population that can be more easily managed. They replaced the complex, questioning science of the library with the rigid, dogmatic encyclopedias of the later period, which gave only the safe versions of knowledge. Consider the maps of the world that the Romans possessed. We see the Tabula Peutingeriana, a strange, elongated parchment that shows the world as a series of roads and stops, like a subway map of an empire. It is practical, yes, but it lacks the mathematical depth of the earlier maps by Eratosthenes, who had calculated the circumference of the Earth with startling accuracy. Why would a civilization go backward in its understanding of the planet's shape? Unless, of course, the true maps were kept for the military and the tax collectors, while the public was given a distorted, simplified version of reality. This is the loss that suggests a controlling force rewriting history. We find the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a Roman-era document that describes trade routes as far as India and hints at lands further east. But the detailed logs of the great navigators, those who might have touched the Americas or the southern tip of Africa, are gone. There are Roman coins found in the soil of the New World, and Roman shipwrecks whispered of in the deep waters off the coast of Brazil. If they reach those shores, why is it not in the history books? Perhaps because the discovery of a new world would have broken the Roman psychological monopoly on the orbis terrarum. As you drift through the layers of sleep, imagine the ghosts of these scrolls. They were written on papyrus, a fragile medium that requires the dry air of the desert to survive. In the damp vaults of Rome, they would have eventually rotted away unless they were painstakingly copied by a class of scribes who were sworn to silence. This creates a terrifying thought that the most important information of our species was once held by a handful of people in a single room, and when that room grew cold, the lights went out for everyone. We see the palimpsests of the Middle Ages, ancient scrolls where the original scientific text was scraped away to make room for a prayer or a ledger. It is a physical manifestation of the erasure, a literal overwriting of the old logic with the new belief. But sometimes, under ultraviolet light, the old words reappear, the ghost of a geometry theorem or a chemical formula shining through the ink of a medieval hymn. It is as if the past is trying to scream through the skin of the present. The great library's ghost is not just a building. It is a warning about the fragility of our collective memory. We live in a digital age where we believe our information is permanent, yet we've seen how easily a server can be wiped, or a cloud can dissipate. The Romans showed us that you don't need to burn every book to destroy a civilization's mind. You only need to control the master copies. The rupture that led to the Dark Ages might have been an intentional decoupling of the elite's knowledge from the public's understanding. As the night air settles in the corners of your room, think of the lost libraries of the Roman villas in Herculaneum, buried under the ash of Vesuvius. One such villa, the Villa of the Papyri, contains thousands of carbonized scrolls that we are only now beginning to read using particle accelerators. What if the answer to the Roman mystery is sitting in a pile of charcoal, waiting for a beam of light to reveal it? What if the unbreakable glass or the self-healing stone is described in a scroll that hasn't been unrolled for 2,000 years? The silence of the Roman archives is the silence of a vault. We stand on the outside looking at the heavy doors, and we tell ourselves that there is nothing inside. But the contradictions of the previous eras, the advanced metallurgy, the global trade, the complex astronomy, suggest that the vault was once very full. As the fog of history rolls in, we must ask, who has the key today? Is history a natural flow of events, or is it a curated experience, a script that has been edited to keep us from realizing how much we have truly lost? The candles of the great library may have gone out, but the smoke still hangs in the air, a scent of burnt wisdom that haunts the Western mind. As you close your eyes, listen for the sound of a turning page, a whisper of a scroll being unrolled in a place where the sun never reaches. The mystery is not that they died, but that they lived so much larger than we're allowed to remember. In the profound stillness of the Arctic, thousands of miles from the sun-drenched forums of Italy, the ice holds a secret that the history books have struggled to reconcile with the image of a pre-industrial world. When scientists drilled deep into the Greenland ice sheet, they expected to find a pristine record of the Earth's atmosphere. Instead, they found a distinct, heavy layer of lead, a geochemical scar that stretches back to the peak of the Roman Empire. The concentration of lead pollution in the air 2,000 years ago was so immense that it left a measurable signature in the polar ice, a signature that wouldn't be seen again until the smoke of the 18th century factories began to choke the sky. This is the lead paradox. It suggests that the Roman world was not a collection of quiet villas and small-scale smithies, but a sprawling, smoke-belching industrial machine. To produce that much lead, the Romans had to be smelting silver at a scale that defies our traditional understanding of ancient logistics. They were processing hundreds of thousands of tons of ore in the mines of Spain, Britain and the Balkans, creating an atmospheric bypass of the natural order. How can we call a civilization primitive when its industrial footprint was planetary in scope? As you drift through the velvet layers of the night, consider what this means for our timeline. If the Romans had the organisational capacity to poison the very poles of the earth, what else were they doing that left no visible trace in the Mediterranean ruins? The lead in the ice is a witness that cannot be silenced by the erasure of scrolls or the crumbling of marble. It points toward a high-energy civilization that was operating at a level of intensity we usually associate with the modern era. We see the remains of their hydraulic mining systems in Las Medullas, where they literally melted mountains using massive surges of water to reveal the gold beneath. They were geoengineers, reshaping the skin of the planet to fuel a currency-based economy that spanned the known world. But this level of industry requires a sophisticated grasp of chemistry, metallurgy, and labour management that seems to have vanished overnight during the rupture of the 3rd century. The ice cores show a sudden, precipitous drop in lead levels, a silencing of the Roman chimneys that coincides with a period of historical chaos. It wasn't just a political decline, it was a total industrial shutdown. Why did the Roman machine stop? We are told of barbarian invasions and debased currency, but these are the symptoms, not the cause. Some researchers look toward a civilizational cycle, a natural limit reached by a society that has exhausted its primary resources, but there is a more unsettling hypothesis, the idea of a controlled demolition. If the ruling elite realized that their industrial output was destabilizing the very climate they relied upon, the Roman climatic optimum, did they choose to dismantle the machine? Or was the Roman world a beta test for a type of global management that was deemed too messy to continue? We see the Roman pumps and water wheels in the deep mines of the Rio Tinto, machines that were abandoned while still in perfect working order, as if the workers had simply walked away one day and never returned. There is no evidence of battle, no sign of fire, just the rising water swallowing the gears of a forgotten industry. The paradox deepens when we look at the Roman relationship with energy. They had the coal, we find Roman coal cinders in the ruins of their forts in northern England, and they had the steam technology in its proto-form. Yet they never made the transition to a coal-fired economy. It is as if they were standing at the edge of a great threshold and were pulled back by an invisible hand. This stunted evolution creates a historical dissonance. We see a world that has the pollution of the 1700s, the logistics of the 1800s, and the metallurgy of the 1900s, all wrapped in the aesthetic of the ancient world. It suggests that our concept of linear progress is a myth. Perhaps history is not a line, but a series of pulses, expansions of human capability that are periodically pruned or reset when they become too complex to manage. The Roman lead in the ice is the ghost of an industrial revolution that was cancelled before its time, leaving us to wonder if we are merely living in the latest iteration of a recurring dream. As the night air settles, imagine a Roman mining overseer standing at the edge of a vast pit in Hispania. He watches the smoke rise into the blue sky, unaware that it will drift north to be frozen in the ice for 2 millennia. He is part of a system that moves mountains and poisons the air, a system that feels eternal. And yet, within a generation, the pit will be silent, the pumps will be still, and the smoke will disappear. The rupture is not a slow decline, it is a break in the frequency. The high-intensity world of the lead smelters is replaced by a world of a local survival, where the knowledge of the great chemistry is forgotten or suppressed. We are left with the shards, the lead pipes in Pompeii, the silver denarii in our museums, but the system that produced them has been erased so thoroughly that we struggle to believe it ever existed at the scale the ice cores suggest. What does it mean for us as we look at our own atmospheric signatures? The Roman lead reminds us that an empire can leave a mark on the planet that outlasts its memory. It tells us that a civilization can be global and industrial without a single computer or a drop of oil. The silence of the Arctic ice is a heavy silence, a reminder that the Earth remembers what the historians forget. As you close your eyes, think of the dark layers buried deep beneath the Greenland snow. They are the black box of the Roman Empire, recording a story of fire and silver that contradicts the marble silence of the ruins. The question is not why Rome fell, but why it was allowed to reach so far into the future's atmosphere before being called back into the dark. Are we too reaching a point where our signature in the ice will be the only thing left to tell the story of our noise? The tapestry of time is rarely a smooth weave. More often, it is a series of frayed edges and desperate knots, and nowhere is the thread more tangled than in the 50 years we call the crisis of the 3rd century. This is the Great Rupture, the moment when the Roman world did not just stumble, but seemed to dissolve into a chaotic static. Between the years 235 and 284, the empire saw more than 25 legitimate emperors and countless usurpers, most of whom met their ends not in bed but at the edge of a blade. Yet, when we look for the contemporary voices of this era, the letters, the journals, the detailed histories that usually accompany Roman life, we find a hollow silence. It is as if a thick curtain of fog fell over the Mediterranean, and when it finally lifted, the world was unrecognizable. The classical empire of philosophy, citizen soldiers, and marble logic had been replaced by a rigid, quasi-divine autocracy under the Illyrian emperors. Why is the documentation for this pivotal half-century so sparse? Was the chaos so absolute that no one could write, or was there a systematic re-editing of the records once order was restored, a cleansing of the archives to hide a truth that was too dangerous for the survivors to know? As you settle into the profound stillness of the late hour, consider the nature of this collapse. We are told of hyperinflation, where the silver content of the denarius dropped to almost zero, turning the once mighty Roman currency into worthless washed copper. We are told of the Cyprian plague, a pandemic so fierce it reportedly killed 5,000 people a day in Rome alone. But there are clues that suggest the crisis was more than just a sequence of bad luck. There are hints of a civilizational reboot triggered by something outside the human sphere. Geologists have found evidence of a solar minimum during this period, a flickering of the sun's output that may have led to the crop failures and the subsequent migrations of the Germanic tribes. Was the Roman state, for all its power, simply a passenger on a planet that had decided to change its frequency? Or was there a controlling force that saw the overextended empire as a liability and chose to initiate a breakdown to facilitate a more controllable version of humanity? The emperors who emerged from this fog, men like Diocletian and Aurelian, did not just fix the empire, they transformed it into a fortress. They moved the capital away from Rome, subdivided the rule into the tetrarchy, and turned the emperor into a figure of distant Eastern-style majesty. This was the birth of the dominate, where the citizen became a subject and the state became an all-encompassing machine. The loss of the 3rd century's true records might be the most significant erasure in Western history. By silencing the voices of the collapse, the new regime could frame their own rise not as a coup, but as a divine restoration. We find mints that were suddenly shut down, entire cities that were abandoned and then rebuilt with massive cyclopean walls that look more like Bronze Age fortresses than Roman architecture. It is as if the Romans, in their desperation, stopped being Roman and became something older, something more primal. There is a suggestive theory regarding the lost legions of this era. Several units that had existed for centuries simply vanish from the rosters without a trace of a final battle. Where did they go? Did they dissolve into the local populations, or were they purged because they held on to the old memory of the Republic? We see the rise of the Palmyrene Empire in the east, and the Gallic Empire in the west, breakaway states that functioned with startling efficiency while Rome was in ruins. These weren't just rebellions, they were attempts to save the Roman idea from the Roman state, and yet their records too have been largely scrubbed from history, leaving us with only the victor's version of events. The rupture of the 3rd century is a warning that a society can lose its identity in a single generation. As the night air breathes against your window, think of the millions of people who lived through that silence, who saw the silver turn to lead and the roads grow quiet, and who had no way to tell us what it was really like. The fog of the 3rd century is not a natural occurrence. It is a wall of shadow built to separate the classical from the medieval. It hides the moment when the Roman mind broke under the pressure of its own complexity. We see the coins of the restitutor orbis, Aurelian, who claimed to have restored the world, but we must ask, what was the world he restored? It was a world of high walls, of secret police, and of a state religion that would soon brook no rivals. The classical light was extinguished in that 50-year gloom, and when the lamps were relit, they burned with a different oil. The questions remain, vibrating in the gaps of the archaeological record. What happened to the libraries of the provincial governors? Why did the art of realistic portraiture die out, replaced by the wide-eyed, staring icons of the late empire? Was it a change in style, or a change in the way humans were permitted to see one another? As you drift toward the final shore of sleep, imagine the city of Rome during the height of the crisis. The great baths are still standing, but the water has stopped flowing. The forums are empty of orators, filled instead with the sound of sharpening swords. The sun is a pale disk in a hazy sky. This is the interregnum of the human spirit, a space where the old gods are dying and the new ones haven't yet arrived. The rupture is the sound of a door slamming shut on 500 years of history. We are the children of the world that was built after the door was closed, and we can only guess at the treasures that were left in the room on the other side. Is history a continuous story, or is it a series of rooms, each one, locked as we pass through, the keys thrown into the sea of the forgotten? The silence of the 3rd century is the silence of the lock turning. The final breath of an empire is not a sudden gasp, but a long, slow exhale that lingers in the air like a ghost that refuses to depart. We are taught that Rome fell in a specific year, to a specific barbarian king, but as the night reaches its deepest point, we must consider the possibility that Rome never truly left us. Instead, it underwent a translatio imperii, a shifting of its frequency from the physical realm into the very architecture of our minds. There is a mystery in the Last Roman, a title claimed by men who watched the marble crumble, yet continued to write in the classical tongue, as if the reality of the collapse was merely a temporary glitch in the eternal order. But where did the true power go? We see the Church adopting the vestments, the language, and the administrative boundaries of the provinces. We see the Pontifex Maximus, a title of the pagan Caesars, being worn by the leaders of the new faith. It is as if the empire realized it could no longer survive as a body of stone and iron, and so it chose to become a spirit, a haunting presence that informs our laws, our concepts of time, and our very definition of civilization. The eternal return of the Roman idea is a haunting loop in the human story. Every few centuries a new power rises and attempts to drape itself in the Roman purple, from the Holy Roman Empire to the Napoleonic dream, to the neoclassical monuments of the modern West. Why are we so obsessed with a ghost? Perhaps because the Roman rupture was never fully healed. The missing knowledge, the lost concrete, the suppressed gears, and the silenced oracles have left a void in our collective soul that we're constantly trying to fill with imitation. We find ourselves questioning the darkness that followed the fall. Was it a natural descent into ignorance, or was it a managed retreat? Some scholars point to the phantom time hypothesis, the controversial idea that centuries of our history were fabricated or skipped, a temporal reboot designed to align the world with a new chronological narrative. While mainstream science rejects this, the sheer lack of archaeological evidence for certain Dark Age periods in the heart of the old empire is unsettling. It is as if a segment of time was simply redacted from the ledger of the world. As the fog of sleep begins to pull at your consciousness, think of the great grid that the Roman surveyors burned into the earth. It is still there, beneath the cornfields of France and the deserts of Libya, a geometric phantom that continues to dictate how we move and how we divide the land. They mapped the world so thoroughly that we're still walking in their footsteps, even when we think we're charting new territory. The Roman story is a reminder of the obscure cause, the realization that all empires are built on a foundation of silence and erasure. They took the vibrant, chaotic world of the Mediterranean and flattened it into a single, manageable image. And, when that image shattered, the pieces were so sharp they cut into every era that followed. We are the inheritors of the missing fragments, the ones who find a bronze gear in the mud or a lead layer in the ice and wonder what kind of giants once walked the earth. But there is a warning in the marble. The Romans believed they were at the end of history, that they had reached the final perfect form of human society. They were so certain of their permanence that they stopped looking for new ways to be. They became a closed system, and like all closed systems, they were eventually consumed by their own entropy. As you feel the weight of your limbs, consider the possibility that we are repeating the same circuit. We have our own Sibylline books in the form of algorithms and data models. We have our own Mithric networks in the dark corners of the internet. We have our own lead signatures in the atmosphere. Are we too approaching a rupture? Is history a linear climb, or are we just another pulse in a cycle we are not permitted to understand? The silence of the Roman forums is not the silence of the dead. It is the silence of those who are waiting for us to join them. The Roman world ends not with a bang, but with a whisper, the sound of a scroll being rolled up for the last time. The Emperor Constantine, on his deathbed, was said to have looked toward the east, toward the new Rome he had built, and seen only the sun setting. The transition from the visible empire to the invisible one was complete. The marble was allowed to fall because the idea was now safe within the structures of the new world. As the night wraps itself around you, imagine the true name of Rome, that word of power that was never written down. It is still out there, vibrating in the frequency of our institutions, in the straightness of our roads, and in the way we dream of power. The mystery is not how they vanished, but how they managed to stay so close while being so far away. Close your eyes now, and let the image of the great Roman roads carry you into the dark. They stretch out forever, crossing borders that no longer exist, leading toward a horizon that is always receding. The eternal city is not a place you can visit on a map. It is the destination of a long journey through the landscape of the human mind. The fog is closing in, the lamps are flickering out, and the gears have stopped their turning. But in the silence, a question remains, a haunting echo that will wait for you until the morning. If the Romans could forget the very concrete that held their world together, what are we forgetting right now? What part of our world is already turning to dust, even as we speak its name? Sleep now, and listen to the pulse of the earth. It is the only thing that remembers the whole story.